Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create a Winter Wishes Snowflake card using this Arctic background Sizzix die. Now, I love this background because it doesn't have a die blades around the edges, so it just cuts out the snowflakes. I'm also going to be using distressed embossing glaze for the background as well as microfine glitter. We're going to use the embossing glaze for the parts of the background outside of the snowflakes, and then we'll use the glitter for the snowflakes. I'm going to use some sukwang on the back of my cardstock before I die cut it. Now you can buy sukwang in sheets, but if you find that you like working with it, and I do, it's definitely a lot more cheaper to go and buy the whole roll. You don't use a ton of it all the time, so a roll lasts a really, really long time. But I do find that it ends up being a lot cheaper than having to buy individual sheets. So once I have that sukwang on my cardstock and I have it on there very well, I make sure there's no bubbles or anything, I am putting it through my Platinum 6 machine to cut that pattern out of the tape backing. I'm putting the die against the tape backing and I'm only really cutting that. So when I look at the cardstock on the other side, there was one corner that I'd cut all the way through. I just put a little bit of that extra tape on that to hold those pieces in. To do this backing, I'm going to do the outside part, not the snowflakes first. So before I take the whole backing off, I did take my tweezers and I took the inside parts out of some of the snowflakes. Some of them have parts that are supposed to be not the glitter part. So I took that backing off and then I took the entire backing off of the background. The reason I did the inside of the snowflakes first was just because otherwise my hand would be in the sticky tape and I'm trying not to touch it as much as possible before putting the embossing glaze on it. So with the embossing glaze, I'm using 3 different colors. I'm using Lost Shadow, Speckled Egg, and Uncharted Mariner, and I'm creating kind of an ombre effect. So I use like a Slurpee straw. You could also use a spoon or a scoop or whatever, and I'm tapping that straw to have the embossing glaze come off of it onto the tape. I'm not dumping it right on the tape, otherwise I'd have harsh lines, and I'm trying to create an ombre effect with this. Then I use some of the tape backing and I rub that in and burnish it in. It takes any of the excess off that sticks to the tape backing. And what I mean by that is the tape backing that are on the snowflakes there. I still have the tape covered from those snowflakes. So when I'm doing this, I'm only doing the background. After I have burnished the first color, I go in with the second color, which is Speckled Egg, and I repeat that process. And by having my straw a little bit higher, and it's probably about, 8 inches, 10 inches high off of the thing, and dropping it, it kind of falls on there and it falls in a little bit more of a random pattern. I'm only doing one color at a time, putting the excess back in the container. This way I'm not getting a bunch of glitter that's contaminated. By putting the rest in the container right after each one, if there are a few specks left on my paper, you will never see that if it gets mixed into the color that I'm using next. So I'm trying not to waste glitter as much as possible, or embossing glaze as much as possible with this. Once I have all 3 colors done, I'm going to put the excess glitter back, or excess embossing powder, embossing glaze, back once again, and then I'm using my embossing tool and I'm melting that powder. Now, it's not going to melt as smoothly as it does on paper. It gets kind of a bumpy, ripply effect, and I really love that. But the cool thing is it still goes nice and glossy, and it just creates a funky, different background. It almost looks like faux enamel or faux glass or something. It's a really unique background there. I noticed there was 2 snowflakes that I forgot to take the backing off. So I'm going to do those one at a time. One is on the darkest color and one is on the medium color. I don't need to pour the embossing glaze over the entire thing. So I just took the backing off of that tiny center of that snowflake, put a tiny bit of the embossing glaze on there, rubbed it in with my finger. I didn't need to go get some tape backing. And then heated it right up and melted that powder. I'm doing the same thing for the medium color, which is the Speckled Egg. Just a tiny little bit, rub it in with my finger, and then heat it up to melt it with the heat gun. Now, I love working with sukwang and microfine glitter and creating backgrounds. I think they look really, really pretty. So anytime I have the tape backings, I keep the excess and I use it for projects like this. If you're new to it and you don't have any tape backing to spare, you can use wax paper or even parchment paper will work for doing the burnishing. You don't necessarily have to have tape backing if you don't have it or if you've tossed it away. There is alternatives. So when I'm using these tweezers, these are tweezers that I have to hold shut in order for them to stay shut. And that way I can have the pressure on them in order to hold that piece of backing to pull it up. When you're doing the backing here with the snowflakes, you can do all of the snowflakes or you can just do a little bit at a time. And if you get to a point where you don't know whether you've taken the backing off, this is how you tell. Tap the end of the tweezers onto the area that you're wondering. If it pulls up and it holds onto it, your tape backing is exposed. If you can pull your tweezers right off like you just saw me do, then the backing is still on there. This backing or this tape backing has printing on it, but sometimes there's areas that you die cut that don't have printing. So sometimes you get kind of confused as to whether you've taken the backing off, and it's nice to know a super easy way to figure it out. And this way you don't have to use your fingers to touch it. You can just use the end of the tweezers and you don't get any of the oils on that tape affecting how it sticks. Once you have everything on there and the glitter on those snowflakes, I did burnish them again just to make sure that the glitter was stuck really well to that adhesive. It also makes them sparkle really nicely. Then I trimmed it down, and I trimmed it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. That piece that I put the tape on there in order to hold the pieces in place, I use that to help hold my piece onto the front of my card. I cut a white mat that was 4 1/8 inch by 5 3/8 inch. So my mats around my snowflake piece are only a 1/16 of an inch. I wanted them really tiny. I wanted the focus to be this snowflake background. And I have some cardstock here that is previously foiled with prism foil, and I'm going to die cut some snowflakes out of it. You could use holographic paper or silver mirror paper, and I'll put that in links to those in the description. This is just something that I already had. I thought the colors in this prism foil would play off really nicely with the colors of the background. Holographic cardstock would do exactly the same thing, and both the holographic cardstock as well as this hot foiled cardstock die cuts beautifully. So they're great for adding little accents, and I love the colors that that shines off of them. I think it's really pretty to go with those snowflakes and with that background. And you can see when I use my die pick on the inside pieces of that snowflake, it comes right out. It die cuts beautifully. There's a tiny little bit of extra background here. I'm going to stamp my sentiment, and then I'm going to emboss it with the Uncharted Mariner embossing glaze. I'm stamping it with the Versamark ink for it to stick to, and I also use my embossing powder tool in order to take any fingerprints off of there and make sure that embossing powder only sticks to where I stamp it. You can't use a dye on this non-porous surface because a dye ink will not dry on it, so I can't just stamp it with distress ink. I have to emboss it or use a permanent ink on this background here. Now, anytime I do these foiled backgrounds or foiled, solid hot foiled pieces, or even specialty paper, I keep all of these pieces that seemingly have nothing left in them, because sometimes there's just a tiny little die within a die set that it's perfect to have specialty paper or metallic or holographic accent to it. So I use these until the bitter end. But they come in so handy when you need a tiny little piece die cut. And by using the hot foiled or solid hot foiled pieces, I'm getting the most use out of that foil and making it stretch as far as possible. Once that is embossed, I use my tiny trimmer to die cut it, and then I chose a coordinating cardstock that goes with my card background, and I created a really tiny mat around it, just like the tiny mat that's on the card background. It's a lot harder to do these tiny mats than it is to do larger ones, but it looks really, really nice, and it ties in very nicely. Once I glue that on with my Bearly Art Glue, I put an acrylic block on there to dry it, or to hold it down to dry while I'm gluing my snowflakes on there. I like using this Bearly Art Glue in this really fine tip, so when I have a die cut like this that's really fine and intricate, I can get that glue in all of the intricate and fine pieces, and I know that it's not going to ooze out. Once I have all 3 of these glued down, I'll put that acrylic block over the whole thing and let that dry for a few minutes before moving on. Because I'm gluing this onto embossing glaze and glitter that is on some double-sided tape, it's really a non-porous surface, so it is going to take a little bit longer to dry than if I were just gluing it onto paper. The last accent that I want to add to this card is some Glacier Gem or Glacier Jewels from Pink Fresh Studios. They are white with a holographic tint that'll go really nicely with these snowflakes, as well as with that prism foiled snowflake die cuts that I have on the front. I'm putting them on the center of the snowflakes, and then I'm also putting them in the center of some of the snowflakes on my background. The one between the 3 die cut snowflakes, I really want to put a gem there because it just, in my mind, makes sense to have a gem in that spot, but that snowflake has an open background, so I didn't want to do any of these snowflakes with tons of gems around the outside, so I'm trying to avoid it, but you'll see me go there with the glue a few times because I just feel like that area needs one. I try to put uneven amount with the rule of odds, and I don't put those gems on every single snowflake on the background. I think less is more, and if they put it on every single snowflake, I think it just kind of takes away from the card, so I'm only putting it on some of them. I think I used a total of 7 gems total for both the snowflakes die cuts as well as the background, but it adds such a nice shimmer, as well as the shimmer from the die cuts and the shimmer from the glitter in the background. This is a perfect card for the winter. It is not over yet, even though the holidays are over. I still wanted to get something in there, and I love doing snow cards as soon as Christmas is done, even though I'm in an area where we don't get a ton of it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fabulous day.